one of the other things I love talking to you about is you're always really up to date with all the different global trends that are happening. And I think they're quite an exciting way and a good way for people who are sort of getting started with investing to explore some different areas. And I'd love to know a little bit about some of the global trends that you're really excited about over the next decade. And if investors are getting started and maybe potentially interested in investing in a thematic ETF, how can they learn a bit more about these trends?
Yeah, apart from my book.
Absolutely. That is a great resource to start with.
I'm going to give an example, okay? And I'll state this categorically. This is not a buy recommendation to everybody, but I am looking in a stock in the US that I kind of tripped over. And it's called MSCI. And of course, MSCI is the company that constructs the indexes of which fund managers work on. And I just gave the example of the VanEck ETF. It's the MSCI Quality X Australia. This company is very much pushing itself in the direction of providing data analytics, okay, for the finance industry, providing index construction across ESG and climate change, decarbonisation. They're providing analytics for major fund managers, pension funds, to analyse the emissions of companies. And why I wanted to cite this example, it's a wonderful example of a company that, in my opinion, has hooked into three massive secular trends. And anyone that's been following me knows I am a strong advocate and bull on global decarbonisation and addressing climate change. I think you are seeing massive amounts of money continuing to move in this area. And what is a separate category now will become the norm in 10 years' time. They are also huge on data analytics. Data analytics is very much part of what a lot of companies are doing at the moment, helping other companies interpret data so they can market better to their clients, whether it's the consumers or other businesses. The third leg is that they are very much involved in the likes of fund management and ETF markets. So there are three secular trends that I'm very bullish on. That's a company that has an incredible growth record. It's performed very strongly. I'm hoping that it's going to come down more if we have more of a sell-off. And I think it's one of those companies that I talk about in the books. It's only $50 billion currently, which might sound big in Australia, but it's relatively not that big in the US. So looking at the themes, I think the largest one we have is clean energy, decarbonisation, electric vehicles. I'm sure your audience has probably been, told all about, Tesla, which is probably one of the shining lights in that area. There are ETFs that you can buy in that space. And you can also look at it in terms of trying to capture different aspects. So there's the materials that go into the production of clean energy products. So you're talking lithium in Australia. Uranium's had a recent run, although I'm not convinced that that's going to play such a big role. But then you also have over in the US, you've got a number of players in the hydrogen space and also in the likes of photovoltaics, batteries, etc. I think that's a really big theme, and you can look at it as holding like a lithium ETF or a clean energy ETF. The other ones that I really like, digitalization is still massive. I think the likes of fintechs, digital wallets, absolutely massive, and people will have the opportunity of potentially, once Afterpay is overtaken by Square, I don't know how long those deposits will be traded here in Australia for Square, but I think you're going to see continued growth in that area. The other major ones, healthcare is still massive. We've got some great healthcare companies in Australia. They tend to be a little bit more highly valued, according to some commentators. But I think healthcare across the globe, particularly life sciences, is still a mega growth trend. Again, there are ETFs in that area. And obviously, the likes of cybersecurity is huge. As we move to, I think, more hybrid work models, and as much as everybody thinks we're going to return to normal, I don't think normal is something, this pandemic's going to be with us for a while yet. And I think that cloud security, cybersecurity, the cloud, improved software services, digitalization, really all of those trends. And if you want to capture them easily, that's why people gravitate towards the big tech, those mega giants, because they capture them very easily.
I find that, pardon me, that example of MSCI or MSCI is a really interesting one. There are a few companies in that space that I've come across over my years, like Morningstar is an example, S&P, many of these companies that kind of are investable, Standard & Poor's, S&P, Moody's, etc. And you know what? What's really funny for me, Danny, is you talked about the market crash and all the lessons learned, is that during the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009, these were the same organizations that were really conflicted. And yet here we are today, they're still super important to the global financial system. And there's like companies like MSCI have, you know, even in the face of pretty much every type of scrutiny that you could think of, they've survived. So it's a really interesting company that you brought up, and it's really relevant. So I just thought I'd just pull that one out because
they're not a ratings agency though. Just remember, you're right. It is in that sector, but I actually think it's a very different company because if you're right, you're absolutely right. It is with S&P, it is with Moody's, etc. And I think that unfortunately, obviously the ratings agencies got really heavily compromised today, didn't they? I just like the fact that these guys, a bit like BlackRock, who set up Aladdin, which is this software to help companies analyze ESG and rate companies. And because there's such pressure from pension funds and investors to ensure that they're not going to get landed with a whole lot of stranded assets, they're all crying out for data that can really quickly scan and say, well, is BHP really doing what it's doing? And if it is doing what it's doing, what's its scope 2 emissions doing? And, are they walking? Yeah. So I guess you're right. But they're also companies that, in spite of all these crises, as you said, they haven't disappeared. And it's almost like you have to wipe out the whole financial sector to get rid of them. And that's basically not going to happen. So to me, they're ones that are, if you've got a rising interest rate environment, they've got an inverse correlation to that. They should not be affected.